All right, we're going to go ahead and begin our program. Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, children, our distinguished guests. On behalf of the commanding officer, Major Vasquez, our senior enlisted advisor, First Sergeant Kaiser, and the staff here at the Shreveport MEPS, we would like to thank you all for taking time out of your day to come celebrate Black History Month with us. So many Black Americans have made impacts on our lives today. From food production, to education, scientists, astronauts, and even the president. But I'd just like to name a few others. You have Miss Harriet Tubman. She was part of the Underground Railroad system, which in turn helped blacks become free. Mr. Frederick Douglass, a well-known anti-slave leader in the 1800s. He was instrumental in persuading Abraham Lincoln in issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. You have Miss Rosa Parks, who by not giving up her seat on the bus, started the bus boycott, leading to desegregation in Alabama and also other places within the United States. Mr. Booker T. Washington, who was driven to educate himself and others, becoming the first teacher and principal of the Tuskegee Institute in Tuskegee, Alabama. Now, just a little military history. Mr. Crispus Attucks, a former slave who was the first African American that died during the Revolutionary War. Major Martin Delany, the first African American field officer in the United States Army. From 1942 to 1949, you have the Montfort Marines, Jacksonville, North Carolina. This is where as many as 20,000 African Americans, men, trained to become Marines and to serve this country. I also want to mention July 1st, 2014, Admiral Michelle Howard became the first woman 4-star admiral, the highest ranking African American female in the United States Navy. And we also don't want to forget the first African American president, former President Barack Obama. There are many African Americans that have contributed not only to their race, but to this great country as a whole throughout history. Too many for me to name in a short amount of time. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and get out of the way. And we're going to have opening remarks by Major Vasquez.
What a great day in Shreveport, Louisiana. Thank you everybody for coming in and welcome. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this great ceremony. We're here to celebrate the vital role of the African American have played in the development and progress of America throughout our history. I hope you enjoy our program that our committee have put together for you today. Thank you.
And now we're going to have prayer by Chaplain Gorman.
If you would, I invite you to pray with me, please. Dear God, you are the sustainer and provider of life. We thank you for your presence, and we ask for a special blessing upon all the helping hands that have put this program together, and bless the food that was also prepared. We also ask for safety among all the military, especially those that are deployed. Help us to embrace our heritage today. Help us to embrace our history so that we will never forget who we are and where we come from. As we stand on the shoulders of great people of the past, guide us to continue their legacy of reaching higher in the future. Empower us to become great men and women, and support us in passing down our heritage to the next generation. Inspire us to be moved by our history and move us to achieve excellence in the future. We pray these things in your precious and holy name, always with honor. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir, for that prayer. And now we're going to have a performance by the Westwood Elementary School.
make a change for once in my life. Gonna feel real good, gonna make a difference, gonna make it right. As I turn up the collar on my favorite winter coat, this wind is blowing my mind. See the kids in the street, not enough to eat. Who am I to be blind, pretending not to see their needs? Ain't summer disregard, a broken bottle top, and a one-man soul. They follow each other on when you know, 'cause they got nowhere to go. That's why I want you to know I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways, and no message could have been any clearer. If you wanna make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. Na 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 na. Oh yeah, I've been a victim of one selfish kind of love. It's time that I realize there's home with no home, not a nickel alone. Could it be really me pretending that they're not alone? Oh, well, deeply scarred, somebody's broken heart, and a washed-out dream. They follow the pattern of the wind you see, 'cause they got no place to be. That's why I'm starting with me. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways, and no message could have been any clearer. If you wanna make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways, and no message could have been any clearer. If you wanna make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. Oh yes, I'm asking him to change his ways, make a change, and no message could have been any clearer. If you wanna make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. You gotta get it right while you got the time. You can't close your mind to that man with the man in the mirror. Oh yes, I'm asking him to change his ways, make a change, and no message could have been any clearer. If you wanna make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. Na 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 na
Thank you, Westwood Elementary and staff for that performance. Now we're gonna have a song by Petty Officer Third Class Bailey. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was
I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieve. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Thank you, Pastor Bailey, for Amazing Grace. Now introducing our guest speaker will be the Senior Enlisted Advisor for the Shreveport MEPS, First Sergeant Kaiser.
That, my Lord, their writing's bigger than mine. But it's an honor again to celebrate Black History Month with everybody again. So welcome our distinguished visitors, our guests, and definitely our team here in Shreveport. One thing that I'd like to mention to you, sir, one thing that since I've been here, the MEPS kind of falls by the wayside. When we talk about service members joining the military, we talk about the recruiters, when we talk about drill sergeants, drill instructors. One thing that a lot of people fail to mention is the work that we do here at the MEPS. We're the unsung heroes of service members joining the military, and I can tell you, we've been recognized numerous times as being one of the top MEPS in the United States, and it's all for, it's definitely attributed to the employees that we got here. So if you would, all the employees, if you could stand up, so we can recognize them. And I can tell you, we do a superb job here, and one thing that we like to do in our partnership with Barksdale is we definitely like to invite everybody over here to see our operations, and definitely officers that are able to swear in our applicants, we'd like for them to come in and take part in that if you all have time. So, on to the introduction. I have no jokes today. The great part is Mr. Jackson, the great part is I'm behind the podium, so everybody gets to listen to me. All right, Colonel Brandon Parker hails from Ogden, Utah. He was a 1996 graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. He is both an Operations Enduring Freedom and Operations Iraqi Freedom veteran with more than over 380 combat hours piloting the B-52H bomber. And I can tell you, sir, a lot of us here have achieved some of the same thing that you did, and we definitely appreciate your service to our country. Currently, Colonel Parker is the Vice Commander of the 2nd Bomb Wing at Barksdale, where he provides for the health and welfare of over 40,000 service members, civilians, veterans, and their families. And I'll say that one again. 40,000 service members, civilians, veterans, and their families. And to us, me especially, veterans and their family members, it's just wonderful that you have that in your bio, because we can never forget about our families and our vets. With that being said, without further ado, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Colonel Brandon Parker.
All right. Well, it is an honor to be here today, and to the young boys and girls from Westwood, thank you. Thank you. I put a big smile on my face. Petty Officer Bailey, I'm always, I fancy myself. I like to sing a little bit. But I need to just know my place today. I'm going to give a speech. Fine job today. Leave the singing up to you. Thank you very much. First Sergeant Kaiser, thank you for the introduction. Major Vasquez, thank you for inviting me to this event. Trust me, I do not take these opportunities for granted. I know there are many people that you could invite to come speak, and it's an honor for me to be here today to celebrate Black History Month with you. Now, thank you not only for your warm welcome, but I thank you for what you do, for your service. Throughout our nation, MEPS personnel stand at the entrance into military life for our finest men and women. And I can tell you, as a leader and a commander in our Air Force, we're extremely grateful. We're extremely grateful. One of our squadrons on Barksdale Air Force Base, it has as its motto, it says, the mission starts here. And for those of us that served and have served, we know that for many, the military career path starts right here. So thank you very much. You should be very proud of your contributions to the defense of this great nation. So, when I walked in, I could smell that good food cooking in the back, so I know not to stand in the way between you and that good food. So I'm going to get on with my talk today. A wise man once said that a good speech is like a comet. It's dazzling, eye-opening, and over before you know it. So the first two may prove difficult to muster, but I will achieve the third, okay? So I want to start today just with a story. And it's a story about a little girl. A 6-year-old little girl who just wanted to go to school. And one summer day, that little girl and her parents, they received a letter. A letter they had been waiting for some time. The letter had said that she had passed this really hard test. And she had been accepted to a new school. So the summer passed and a few months went by. And in the fall of that same year, her day had finally come. She got dressed up in her pretty little dress. And with all her school supplies, off she went to school. Only on this day, her journey to school would be like none other she had ever seen. As she approached the school, she saw mobs of people. And at first, when she saw the people, she thought it was a parade of some sort. But these people, they were holding signs. And they were shouting horrible things, the worst of things. They were calling her names, names she didn't even understand. And other slurs that she would come to know meant really harmful things. Some of the people were even yelling death threats at her. As she stepped out of her car, she wasn't greeted by a teacher or a school administrator. She was greeted by federal marshals. And the marshals said that they were there to walk her into school. When the little girl got to her classroom, she noticed she was the only one there. The only one, not one other student. But that wasn't the only difference that she discovered. While the other children went out to the playground for recess, she stayed inside. When other students went to the cafeteria for lunch, she stayed in her classroom and always ate a bag lunch. She later learned that she was the only one in her class because other parents refused to let their children go to her class. She was told she couldn't go to recess out of fear of what the other children may do to her. She learned that she couldn't go to the cafeteria out of fear someone would poison her food. But amidst all the chaos, all the confusion, all the animosity, there was one bright spot for this little girl. Her teacher. Her teacher who greeted her with open arms and not insults. Her teacher who showed love and not anger. Her teacher, this one teacher who sat with her side by side every day of that school year. Through it all, this little girl endured the abuse, day after day. Daily she prayed for the strength to carry on, in hopes that one day it would get a little bit better. Unfortunately, the abuse was not only limited to this little girl. Her parents and grandparents lost their jobs. And that teacher who sat with her side by side, well, her contract wasn't renewed the following year. This little girl's name is Ruby Bridges. She's pictured on the front of your program today. Ruby was among the first black students in our nation to attend an integrated school in the segregated South in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1960. Right here in our state. So why do I remind you of Ruby's story? For it could have been Rosa's story, or Martin's story, or Harriet's story, or stories of the multitude of African Americans, just ordinary people, who in their own way, in their own time, did extraordinary things to realize the fullness of the American dream. You see, for Ruby and her family, it wasn't just about going to a better school. It was about equalizing the rights, liberties, and freedoms for all peoples united under the promise of our Constitution. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, 230 years ago, in a hall that stands and still stands in Philadelphia, a group of men gathered, and with these simple words launched America's improbable experiment in democracy. Farmers and scholars, statesmen and patriots, who had traveled across an ocean to escape tyranny and persecution, finally made real their Declaration of Independence at a Philadelphia convention that lasted through the spring of 1787. The document they produced and eventually was signed, but ultimately unfinished. It was stained by this nation's original sin of slavery, a question that divided the colonies and brought the convention to a stalemate until our founders chose to allow the slave trade to continue for at least 20 more years and to leave any final resolution to future generations. Of course, the answer to the slavery question was already embedded within our Constitution. A Constitution that had at its very core the ideal of equal citizenship under the law. A Constitution that promised its people liberty and justice, and a union that could be and should be perfected over time. And yet the words on the parchment would not be enough to deliver this sacred promise, or provide men and women of every color and creed their full rights and obligations as citizens of the United States. What would be needed were Americans in successive generations who were willing to do their part through protests and struggles on the streets and in the courts, and always at great risk, to narrow the gap between the promise of our ideals and the reality of their time. Certainly we honor the past, the time of different eras, but we do so with a vision for a better tomorrow. For we know that the vestiges of days long gone can creep into the collective consciousness of today's society if we are not careful. I've often been asked what to make of the African American experience. And as I reflect, two prominent themes always emerge. The first is that the African American experience is and has always been the American experience. You cannot separate the two. They are one, interwoven into a singular tapestry of this great nation. The second theme is that our nation has the innate ability to remedy its own ills, to change from within through the diligence of its greatest and most precious resource, its people. You see, when you think of America's past, present, and future, the grammar may change over time, but the logic remains the same. We have been, and always will be, a nation of self-governance. It's the power of the people, all peoples, that drive us towards a better place. So what we know, what we have seen, is that America can change. That is the true genius of this nation. What we have already achieved gives us hope for what we can and what we must achieve in the future. Black History Month actually started in 1926 as a way to recognize the achievements of people of African descent. When it first began, the celebration lasted just a week. But maybe they realized there were just too many good things to talk about in a week. And so historian Carter Woodson selected the second week of February because it coincided with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Over the years, it transformed into the entire month. It's a wonderful time to step back and recognize the many great gifts African Americans have brought to and share with our nation. It's also a time to share a dialogue about our unique yet shared cultures in an effort to break down superficial barriers that have divided this nation. Division that has resulted in a continual struggle for our divine manifest. And it hasn't been an easy struggle. We don't have to go all the way back in history to see the effects of institutional racism in this country. You can go back to the events that happened in the lifetimes of many of people in the lives today. The landmark case Brown versus the Board of Education should have ended school segregation in 1954 and started us down a road to integration. Yet just a few years later, we saw the Civil Rights Act of 1957, and then the Civil Rights Act of 1960, and then the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and so on and so on. The laws kept coming, but people kept on finding new ways to try to keep the status quo going. Fortunately, other people were fighting to beat back the injustice, to beat back the segregation and discrimination perpetuated on certain communities. And in many ways, the struggle still continues today. So that's partly why we gather here today, to celebrate our history. We honor those who came before. We celebrate how far we've come as a society, but we also honor those who continue the struggle. We must remember that laws and rules are important, but they are different from emboldening and living out our values. Laws bring a sense of order, but restoring purpose and honoring values bring true, lasting change. We mustn't forget that part of the struggle in that time was that good people stood by and watched as the bad happened. Good people remained neutral and looked the other way so they wouldn't have to do the hard thing and stand up for what is right. So I want to take a moment to address this year's theme, a crisis in black education. Frankly, I do not profess to be an expert in this field. And if any of you could look at my past marks during my academic tenure, you'd know too well that this is evident. But I am astute enough to recognize where we've been, where we are, and where we want to go. So I hold on to the time-honored truths that have made progress a reality thus far. For me, the logic remains intact, that the will of our nation's people matters most. Laws, legislative bills, and new policies are necessary, but on their own will never be sufficient. We, ordinary, everyday citizens, must take ownership and do our part. I don't know how you feel about the current state of black education, but I think we can all agree that improving education takes a level of unyielding commitment. Surely you need committed students who are eager to learn, but committed students get their value-based foundation from committed households. Committed households comprise committed families, and committed families make up committed neighborhoods and communities. To cure the ills, we have to fight the disease and not just the symptoms. When I look at those old pictures of little Ruby standing on the steps of the William Frantz School, I think of all the imprints on her historic journey. The little child who showed the indomitable strength and perseverance, her parents who continually encouraged her along the way, the community that rallied to offer them support, the U.S. Marshals who stood watch, her teacher, Miss Barbara Henry, a white lady who would never give up on that little girl, the judges who issued the desegregation decrees. All of them did their part. I have a dear friend of mine. His name is Rodney. We met some decades ago. And Rodney told me when he was a little boy in the first grade, he had a learning disability. They didn't call it that back then, but that's what he had. He had a learning disability. And when he was in the first grade, he was really struggling. He had a teacher who saw something in him that no one else did. The school wanted to hold him back. But this teacher said, I think you can do it. She worked with Rodney every single day that final semester. It got to the point where she had become so close to Rodney's family that she would walk him home every day after she had tutored him on her own. Little Rodney would grow up to be a stellar student in his high school. He would attend and graduate from the U.S. Air Force Academy. He would later earn a law degree from Duke Law School and then become a White House Fellow, working for the administrator of NASA. He's now an executive vice president for Chick-fil-A, where he heads the Chick-fil-A Foundation, and he is now able to give back to multitudes of kids all across this country. One person. He says one person completely altered the path of his life. One person. So I ask you today, what role will you play? What is our part? Ultimately, I think this is why we serve. This is why we put on the military uniform. This is why we dedicate our professional careers to furthering education. This is why some run for office. Essentially, we want to do our part to make this country better for tomorrow. A 19th century clergyman named Edward Everett Hale once wrote, "I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And I will not let what I cannot do interfere with what I can do." I want to challenge you to take this Black History Month to think of our place in history. Which side of history will you stand on? We all know we still have a lot of problems, and many of these problems can be traced to historical roots far before we came. You only have to read the news to see how injustice still affects not only the Black community, but other communities as well. But I ask you not to be neutral. Make a promise to yourself to speak up, to do something when you see injustice. I'd like to leave you with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It says, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Let us all work together to be the light that drives out darkness. And if we work together, we can continue to make great strides to a better future." I thank you all for what you do. I thank you for being here today to share in this celebration. And I look forward to what the future will bring. May God continue to bless you, and may God continue to bless this nation that we call home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Parker, for that speech. Now, we're going to have awards presentation. Major Vasquez, first on our panel.
Sir, please come in. Sir, on behalf of the MEPS, everybody here, thank you for coming in and give us those words, great words of inspirations. All right. It reads, thank you for your kind words of inspiration, reflection, and wisdom. Thank you.
All right.
All right, thank you, everybody. I want to thank the committee that put this together, this great event, and the luncheon. I really appreciate that. EXO led that committee, so thank you so much of each and every one of you for putting this together. Okay, I want to thank the children of Westwood Elementary School. Okay, petty officer. He really was a great son. I was not expecting that. Thank you, Principal Ellis. I really appreciate it. Okay, thank you so much. Sheriff Ellis. Thank you to Petty Officer 3rd Class Bailey for that son. Appreciate it. Thank Colonel Parker for the great words of wisdom. Okay, I really appreciate you and your wife coming in and taking time of your busy day to share this with us. Okay. Now, please join us in the cafeteria for a great lunch because the food is waiting. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our Black History program. Thank you all for coming out. Hope you enjoyed yourself. Hopefully we didn't hold you too long. But it's time to eat. Thank you.